Alan Wake is a confusing, narrative and narrator-heavy, your flashlight's light beam is your primary weapon, unique aiming and fighting mechanics, convoluted, paradox-forming, blending action and survival horror aspects, heavily influenced by so many different forms of media like horror stories and even the Twilight Zone TV show to name a few, surprisingly challenging, a little bit clunky, a lot unfair, an excellent continuation of Remedy's game development hot streak, Alan Wake couldn't run a marathon if his life depended on it, collect-a-thon, almost liminal spaces, love story, muse story, insane video game, and I absolutely think if you haven't tried it yet, you should give it a shot. I finished it in about 14.5 hours playing the remastered version on my PlayStation 5 and I had a fantastic time. What can I say about Alan Wake which hasn't already been said? In the simplest terms, Alan Wake makes me want to slowly comb through every single level to try and understand and consume as much of the world and story as possible, just like most of Remedy's past titles. Let's start from the beginning. If you've played any of their heavy hitters, you know that Remedy Entertainment and Sam Lake aren't just game makers. They're world creators, they're storytellers. They know precisely how to pull in a player, keep them close, all the while blinding them, confusing them, and cookie crumbing them throughout an entire playthrough, right before a satisfying conclusion in which the player usually receives all the answers to the questions they've been trying to figure out all on their own. A playthrough of Alan Wake feels like you're just along for a quick ride in this pocket of Alan's life. It's definitely one of the most exciting parts of Alan's life, but it's also very well crafted around the character. Alan Wake and the town the game takes place in, Bright Falls, both genuinely feel like they existed before the game takes place and once it's finished will continue to exist afterwards. Those heavy hitters I mentioned earlier, titles such as Control and the first two Max Payne games to be quick about it. I played through both Max Paynes as a kid and I've revisited both many times since. Yes, I'll be the first to admit there's definitely some nostalgia attached. Still, the narratives of both Max Paynes and Control are exceptionally well written, and Remedy continues that trend through Alan Wake, effortlessly passing the test of time. I haven't yet tried Quantum Break, but it's on my list and I'm very excited to see what they come up with next. I also intend to play through Alan Wake 2, and I will definitely be sharing my thoughts on it on a future video on the channel. So subscribe, hit the bell and all that if you're interested in those. Alan Wake was originally released on May 14, 2010 as an Xbox 360 exclusive, with a PC version following about a year and a half later. Remedy Entertainment, already well known for the very successful Max Payne 1 and 2, were ready to move on to another title. After a long development time, a short stint as an open world title, and many different and convoluted setbacks, Remedy finally signed an exclusivity agreement with Microsoft and Alan Wake was released to the world. The version I played and captured all the footage on is Alan Wake Remastered, a PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series remaster of the original game released in late 2021. This remastered release brought with it a handful of changes, mostly for the better. To put it simply, resolution and FPS upgrades are the main upgrades here. However, as you may know, when remastering a title, one thing that is often an issue is licensing agreements. These are usually only tied to the original game, so a remaster must reapply or even create new deals to offer the same experience as the original game did. These most often affect music or brands that are in the game. A recent example is the Grand Theft Auto Definitive Editions. These lost a large amount of music. There's also the Forza titles where they usually just stop being sold after a couple of years, or they have to remove cars entirely once the agreements run out. In the case of the Alan Wake remaster, somehow they were able to keep all the music actually in the game. This was probably a high priority to Remedy, as each chapter is actually concluded with a song that has a very specific meaning to the point in the story that the player's at. However, we did lose some weird product placements from the original version of the game. In my opinion, these brought a considerable amount of 2000s-ish charm to the title. They were funny and always seemed extremely out of place, adding to the camp of the entire title. First off, there were these batteries for your flashlight. These are Energizer branded, and because the batteries are what your main weapon runs on, they run out extremely quickly. You can run through a full flashlight battery charge in seconds, and it'll cost you multiple battery packs to refill your flashlight. I can't imagine the Energizer product placement team were too happy about that one. Another memorable one was the Verizon placement. Alan looks at his cell phone a couple of times in the cutscenes, and there's a huge Verizon logo staring back at him, complete with the freeze frame advertisement fourth wall break. The remastered edition also changed the in-game character model for Alan Wake to more closely resemble the actual actor that was playing him, which is something Remedy seems to love doing, as look what they did to Max Payne from Max Payne 1 when they switched over to Max Payne 2. Max Payne's face in Max Payne 1 is just Sam Lake's weird smirking face plastered onto the in-game model, and then in Max Payne 2 they decided to take things a little more seriously. Another really fun addition to Alan Wake Remastered was the random QR codes in the game. These lead to weird unlisted YouTube videos of usually just Alan losing it in front of his typewriter. Most of the changes in the remastered version do improve the game, and the remaster is the way to go. It's available for $40 while not on sale, and much cheaper while it is on sale. Also, if you collect the PlayStation Plus games every month, you got it for free back in July of 2023. Now that all of that's out of the way, let's get into the actual story of Alan Wake. Alan Wake is a successful crime fiction author whose most recent novel ended the book series that brought him his fame by killing off the main character. Alan has since then been dealing for writer's block for just over 2 years. So, he and his wife decide to go to Bright Falls, USA, a small mountain town to decompress, hoping that upon their return to the big city, Alan will finally be ready to create his newest work of art. But as you can imagine, things don't go entirely to plan. Alan's loving wife surprises him with a typewriter, and he loses it on her in disbelief that she would try and force him, a famous writer, to actually write a novel. He storms out to give himself some alone time, and basically as soon as he does, he hears a bunch of screams and his wife has disappeared. Cut to black, and Alan wakes up in a car crash, and somehow a week has passed. A kidnapper calls him. Apparently, Alan has written a manuscript during that lost week that the kidnapper wants finished. In return for the finished manuscript, Alan will get his wife back. Now, on a quest to save his wife, Alan must venture into the dark, scary forest of Bright Falls to meet the kidnapper, where he gets attacked by the undead. A considerable theme of the story that they keep pushing into your face is that Alan and Alice are extremely in love. At least, Alan really is. Alan would always do anything for Alice, calls her his muse multiple times, and they just seem to have this connection. The connection between these two is basically the entire reason for the game's motivation. If Alan didn't quite want to brave the entire forest just to save his love, things would be very different. Love and or muse worship kind of vibes is the main theme throughout the title. There's this radio segment in the game where the two hosts talk about love. Maybe I was in the perfect headspace to listen to this when it came on during my playthrough, but it really hammers home the game's love theme.
Doc, you were talking about life and finding that special someone, that soulmate.
Well, you were talking about that. I was saying I don't buy it.
Well, see, to me that's strange because I always pegged you as a hopeless romantic.
You got me there, Pat. But I think love's where you look for it. And you need to do a lot of looking, sure. But the idea that there's that one special person out there for you, and if you miss that chance, it's gone forever and you're forever incomplete. I mean, isn't that depressing? Or, heck, childish even? There's plenty of fish in the sea.
And apparently a fisherman has a fishing analogy for everything, but what you're saying, isn't that a little harsh?
Well, no. What I am saying is that your potential for finding that connection isn't limited to what's essentially a chance encounter. How is that harsh?
Yeah, well, I guess that's a nice thought, but let me say something personal here.
Okay.
Now, well, I don't disagree with you exactly, but I can't really fit that together with what I feel, what I felt for someone, because she was the one, she was. And I let her drift away from me. Maybe I didn't put in the work, I don't know, but, well, since then, and it was a long time ago, but since then there hasn't been anyone, not like her. And I'm not saying I dwell on her or haven't moved on. I like my life, I'm not living in the past, but I do miss the way she completed me.
You can't argue with the heart, Pat.
I'm sorry.
Alan requires his wife's love to continue on, and she is the entire reason that he can do what he does. It might not always be directly her actions, could maybe just be the idea of her, but she is what keeps him going. Later in the game, the story throws itself into a bunch of paradoxes that get open near the end, where they imply a bunch of things that are really difficult to actually kind of make sense of. And I don't want to spoil things for you, as my intention for this entire video is for you to go out and try out Alan Wake if you haven't yet. But the Switcher and its origins are a big paradox that, in my opinion, can't fully be explained. I'm happy to discuss your theories, and I'll share mine in the comments below. Now, once you get into the forest to meet up with the kidnapper, you meet your first enemies. This is where the combat begins. The flashlight is the star of the show, even though it alone cannot kill an enemy. First, you have to remove the darkness from an enemy. This is clearly defined by an audible cue. And as soon as you flash light onto an enemy, a visible shrinking circle. The circle slowly decreases in size as you shine the flashlight onto the enemy, and once the circle shrinks down to nothing, the darkness has been removed or destroyed from the enemy. After the darkness has left the enemy, you can then shoot them with actual guns and they are able to take damage. In more simple terms, the darkness is their armor. The enemies are bulletproof while they still have the darkness on them. The flashlight can be aimed at an enemy, and then if you hold the trigger, the light is more concentrated and deals more damage to the darkness, but this swallows up that Energizer battery power much quicker. The flashlight isn't the only way to remove the darkness from an enemy, as there's often generators, other lights, flashbangs, and even flares hanging around the environment, and all the checkpoints in the game take place under these very well-lit street lamps, and the enemies can't even cross into these. They actually just disappear once you walk into the light. Luckily, the darkness on the enemies doesn't regenerate unless you make the enemy disappear and then essentially respawn them. So you make them disappear by running into a well-lit area, usually inside a building or under a street lamp, the game's checkpoints, like I said. This all results in the combat boiling down to remove the darkness from the enemies however you can and then shoot them with bullets until they die. Welcome to Bright Falls, USA. As for weapons, you actually start the game off with your trusty handgun, but there are also flares, shotguns, flashbang, hunting rifles, and the best weapon of the entire game, the flare gun. All of the weapons are great, they feel good and weighty, and you can finish the game with any or all of them, but the flare gun is actually the one gun that does both, clears the darkness and kills the enemy. Smaller enemies it'll actually kill within just one shot. Very helpful in tough situations where you get surrounded. Along with the regular enemies who are just these possessed hunters that essentially got lost in the forest somehow, there are also these boss type enemies, where the undead is a specific person from the story that's been taken over by the darkness. These boss type enemies usually have more darkness armor and require more bullets to kill. Another enemy type is possessed objects. These only require a flashlight to kill, but they do often have a good amount of darkness within them, requiring a longer time of flashlight bursts to take them out. There are also birds. The birds attack you in this coordinated pattern in which they make a noise and then dive through you, causing damage, and then you hit them with your flashlight, and with enough light pushed on them, they will disappear. You can also basically negate the damage if you flash the light on them right before they actually hit you. The boss type enemies definitely were my favorites. One really little quirk that I loved about them is they love to say the lines that their normal counterpart regular character would say before he was turned. So at some point you're fighting a guy and this guy's screaming stuff like, "Please don't feed the animals." As much as I love Alan Wake, the constant narration, the fun of the different enemies, the thing I dislike the most about this entire game is Alan Wake cannot run. I swear they're hiding the fact that he's just inhaling cigarettes and cheeseburgers whenever we're not in control of his character. He's a dark, moody horror cop, detective, story, killer, writer guy, so I guess he's probably been smoking for most of his career. But I can't help but feel that the developers could have done something a little bit different for the running mechanics. Even something as simple as adjusting the run of both us and the enemies to both just be a little bit faster, so it didn't feel like a normal human could easily get away from them and Alan is the only one out there who can't. A really cool thing I did enjoy is that enemies would simply spawn in behind you whenever you were fighting other enemies, so any combat encounter always gave you that feeling of you're about to be attacked and nowhere is really safe. Now, if you couldn't tell already, I really liked this game, and in consequence I had a lot of memorable moments that I want to share. I will attempt to be as story spoiler free as possible, but to explain the moments you're kind of required to explain the moments. Without further ado. When you first meet Barry, Alan's agent/manager, everyone is dressed so drab in Bright Falls, USA. The police are in these faded colors, Alan himself is barely awake, there's basically a gray-brown filter over top of your view. And at one point, Alan is just hanging out in the police station and has just sucker punched the local celebrity doctor. Before the police can even react, Barry comes rolling in screaming about how no one's going to touch his client, and this man is wearing the ultimate outfit to show off that he's the big city agent guy. He's got a red puffer bomber jacket with a Hawaiian shirt underneath and shorts. I mean, look at this guy. Where does he fit into this game? And that's pretty much what's so great about him. He's the opposite of everything else in this town. He's the perfect fit. He's the humor when things are getting too scary. He's loud. He's not afraid to have a good time. And later on, he's the guy who actually believes Alan because he's witnessing everything together. And when things are paused or slower, he steps in and out of the story expertly and eventually just happily joins us along our quest of trying to save Alan's wife while trying to make sense of any of these events. Another really fun character is Nightingale, this FBI agent who just hates Alan Wake for apparently no reason. And this guy's always calling Wake by any author who isn't him. He's always got a new, funny, well-known author to call Alan Wake instead of using his name. And to me, it kind of implies that he really likes him as an author because he's making fun of him, but he's doing it in more than this base level knowledge of world-renowned authors. Sure, Stephen King gets mentioned a couple times, but then he goes and calls Alan Spillane, who's apparently quite famous, but I didn't know and a lot of people around me didn't really know. So Nightingale definitely sat down and at least read one of Alan's novels. Also, weirdly enough, the game is really comfortable just throwing Nightingale in the whole thing without really any explanation for why he hates Alan so much, and even literally tries to kill Alan multiple times. Apparently, Nightingale's hatred/obsession with Alan is explained in a novel that is attached to the game, but I just thought that was a weird way to actually portray him as a character, as one of my favorite things about Remedy is how much they like to give all the answers to the player at the end of the game. But then again, this is this Remedy shared universe that started here, so things are allowed to get a little wonky, I guess. I also adored the Night Falls episodes. They reminded me of Tales of the Crypt, which is a TV show that I adore, which is basically just telling scary stories just to tell scary stories. It's a different story every episode. The characters don't ever really follow through. It's really a good thing. You should check it out. The Night Falls episodes were heavily used to foreshadow or even cast some light on future or past events in the game, but sometimes they're just there to watch for fun. Finally, the world building and the constant nods to the actual player. There are so many little collectibles in the world of Alan Wake. I mean, look at all these. The developers put them in pretty much everywhere along the path and completely off the path, all while making sure every single environment looked lived in and plausible. Random shack on the side of the trees? Yep, most likely you can go take a look inside. Might be empty with some old cans strewn around, there might be a collectible, or it might just be 2 twin beds and a bookshelf, but no real reason to be there other than just for the player to come take a look. Even in the open world areas. Not all of the buildings are enterable, but for such a wide open space that is absent of any human life, the buildings that do let you in usually have at least a small reward for your curiosity. Now, throughout the whole game, you're constantly fighting off the undead, and by the end of it, you've technically killed hundreds of these things. I've heard it said that these are humans that Alan is killing, and they're actual tourists that have disappeared in the forest over the years. The darkness takes over them, but it's still their actual bodies. But if you look at the actual enemy models, it looks like there's 5 to 10 or so that are continuously repeated. So in my opinion, I think it's more so a couple of tourists that just keep on coming back to attack you over and over. They're weak, but they can't permanently go away. But also, let's be honest here, it's a video game and it isn't really feasible to make hundreds of unique enemy skins to be one-off kills at the start of the game. But man, imagine how cool that would actually be. I wonder what the actual lore is. Is the forest just turning everyone who gets close, or is it a bunch of hunters and it just keeps recycling them to bother Alan even though they're weak? All in all, Alan Wake is an extremely odd game, there's no doubt about it. But it's also honestly quite wonderful. The story's odd, the running is odd, the enemies are odd, the entire concept of this game is odd. And yet I keep coming back to this classic title to relive the madness and try to catch a new detail or concept that I missed on my previous playthrough. If you've watched the end and you seriously haven't given this a try yet, this is your 1000th reason. Do yourself a favor and give this game a shot. You seriously will not regret it. Thanks for watching till the end.